Hey, it's Nycci Nellis. Welcome to another episode of Industry Night. For those of you who are new here, hi, thank you so much for joining me. And for those of you who are old here, hi, and welcome back. So a little bit about me for you newbies and for you oldies too. I have been covering the DC food, wine, and hospitality scene for the last 20 years. I know if you're watching, I don't look that old, but I have been and I love it. And I get to do it in a variety of amazing ways. So it all started with theListAreYouOnIt.com, the online e-zine that tells you absolutely everything happening in the DC metro area. Every event, every opening, every food promotion. If you want in on the hospitality scene, it is all in there. Of course, you follow me at NYCCINELLIS on all the platforms, all of them. Even if I'm not on them, my people are. So everything is on there, especially Instagram, because you get to follow me on all my travels and what I'm eating. You do listen to Foodie and the Beast every Sunday at 11 a.m. It's DC's only food and wine variety radio show, still on air, 16 years coming September. It's very exciting. And then, of course, we've got Industry Night. So I love this show because I've been doing it for 7 years. It is a podcast, but now thanks to Heartcast Media, it also has a YouTube component. So you can either download this and listen or watch me on YouTube and see my guests and where I am and what I'm doing. And to that point, in case you notice, I've been away for a couple weeks, but I am back. I've been traveling and having a lot of fun, but I'm very excited about this month's residency. The next few weeks, I will be at several of Peter Chang's restaurants. Now, you know who Peter Chang is. Peter Chang used to be called the Restless Chef because after he left the Embassy of China, he would be at all these different restaurants around Virginia. And the foodies, this is like back in the 90s, right?
Early 2000s.
Early 2000s. Okay, thank you. They would follow him wherever he went because there were so few people doing his specialty, Sichuan cuisine. So I'm very excited to be in Chang, which is the first Peter Chang restaurant here in the DC market. They are hosting me here and at their brand new Ni Hao, which will be opening in Crystal City, or now known as National Landing. So I cannot wait to talk to Chef's daughter and business partner, Lydia Chang, who is sitting here with me right now, because she's brought me in to do the shows here for the next few weeks, and I'm very grateful for that. Now, later in the show, before I get into Lydia, I'll be talking with Kathy Jentz. She is editor and publisher of Washington Gardener. So it is planting season. Now, if you're in my house, it's planting season all the time because I got plants all over the place. But when Kathy and I connected, I was like, what would be a better time than mid-April to talk about how we're going to be planting our gardens this year and preparing for spring, summer, fall, and then into the winter. So I cannot wait to talk with her because she's the absolute expert, and we're going to get into all that. But first, before I break into Lydia, where have I been traveling and where have I been eating? So a quick couple things. I won't take too long because I want to get to Lydia. So yes, I did go to Barcelona. As you know, my daughter Tess is there studying for the semester. She's living the life. We should all come back as Tess next time around. But I got to spend some great time with her, and we did all the things. If there was a Gaudi, I saw it. If there was hamon, I ate that. And Iberico too. Like Iberico and hamon at absolutely every single meal. The croquetas also at every meal. I ate in some amazing restaurants. I saw some beautiful things. And all of that is going to be detailed on my Instagram page so you can see it all there. Before I left, the James Beard finalists were announced at the Waldorf Astoria. I was there for it. It was pretty fantastic. DC had an amazing, amazing showing, and the Waldorf Astoria is so sparkly and pretty. It was just such a celebration of the national awards and what people are doing in this industry nationally, and then, of course, what's happening here locally. Afterwards, I was invited upstairs to Jose Andres Bazaar for an incredible luncheon, which was pretty fabulous. And I've also had dinner at two new restaurants that I really want to tell you about. Cucina Marini. Matt Adler. You know him from Caruso's and a bunch of other places, but he is back at Marini. He's also at Caruso's, so don't get nervous. He's at both places, but he is also with Marini. He's doing Cucina Marini. It's delicious. Now, I don't love the setup of the space, but I mean, he didn't build it, so it's not really on him. But the pastas are pretty glorious, and the food is amazing. You can see that on my Instagram. And I also checked out what Russell Blue Smith is doing at Alfreda, which is his new pizza place over in DuPont Circle, actually not far from where I am right now at Shenzhen. And he's really happy. He used to work with Scott Trudeau at the Source, and now he's executing these gorgeous pizzas. He does a grilled provolone dish. It's just like a ooey gooey dip of cheese that you use his bread with. It's so good. Anyway, so check them all out, and you can see everything also at NYCCINELLIS for all the goods. Okay, Lydia Chang.
Hi. Nycci.
Thank you so much.
I'm hungry just from hearing about it.
We have a lot of eating to do.
Yeah.
But let's talk a little bit about, I want to talk a bit about your dad.
Sure.
Just about his story and how he wound up with almost 17 restaurants in less than 20 years.
Yeah.
So can we talk a little bit about that?
Of course. Well, Dad is the man. He is really, the founder, the chef. He always had this idea. When he first arrived at the United States, he did work for the Chinese embassy in DC. And at the time, he was just making a lot of state dinners at the vice ambassador's residence. And, he was cooking for all these people, and people loved his food. And he was like, oh, maybe they're just, patronizing him. What else can they say about his food, right?
So he was kind of like, they're just saying that.
They're just saying that, yeah.
Right.
But he was also occasionally would go out to eat with his friends outside of the embassy. And they would take him to the Chinese restaurants in the area. So back in the days, that was in the Northern Virginia area, maybe a few in Rockville, not the dining scene we see nowadays.
Right.
Anyway, so he went to all these restaurants, and they have some like unique Chinese spice flavors, but none of that tasted like what he was cooking. And maybe something like the spice level is a little watered down. Maybe it was a little bit too much of like one flavor. Do
you think it had to do with access to products from China a little bit just at the time? And also there was a notion, I think 20 years later, it's a major change.
Yeah.
There was a notion that Americans didn't like spicy, and Americans, the Chinese restaurants catered to American tastes, making things sweeter.
So he had a lot of questions, right? He has all this, he was very curious about, what was happening. And he was wondering if there is a crowd that would love what he does.
Right.
And he put all of that into the first restaurant he worked at in a little strip mall in Fairfax City. I
can't remember who found him. Was it Don Rockwell or...
Let me go back to, I honestly don't know who was following us back in the days.
Okay.
I was a 10th
Were you born?
grader.
Were you born yet? Okay.
Yeah, I was a sophomore in high school. And he was just like starting to put a lot of Sichuan dry chilies, a lot of Sichuan peppers, and a lot of like really intense red chili oil that people were looking at a huge pot of ball with just a lot of contents floating on top. And, naturally they smell the aroma when they see it. And they were looking at
I'm
plate.
Salivating now, like just as you're talking about it. I'm like, I could totally picture what you're talking about.
Yeah, and they were just like looking at a plate of sesame chicken sitting in front of them, and they were questioning, what was this?
Right.
Like, I wanted to eat what other people ordering. So let's say back in the days, it was 2 set of menus. It was 1 set of menu in Chinese only because nobody could translate what he was cooking. Nobody knew. Even the restaurant owners were like, okay, you know, like before you joined us, we still do a certain business and we don't want to completely to kick that customer away. Who knows if they're going to like it? And when Dad brings in his menu, the owner was like, okay, we're going to test it out and we are just going to have 2 sets of menus. 1 in English, 1 in Chinese without translation. And you know, the first group of diners, guarantee you, they discovered somebody was eating something different next time. And they said, I want to order that. The server were like, we don't know.
You watch it go by. You're like, wait, where is that on the menu? Right?
And the servers back in the days were like, oh, I don't know like what to tell you about the food besides, you know, getting the same thing. So the smart of customer became really smart. They were like AOL back in the days, and they form a group of friends that brings a Chinese translator that happens to love the food and also doesn't mind to translate. So they ate a whole menu. Every time they come, they are in a group of like 7, 6.
That's a crazy story. I didn't know that part.
Yeah.
That is very cool.
So what they ended up doing is translating our menu to have their own English version, and they tasted everything on the menu.
Wow.
But it didn't last very long because Dad moved on.
Hence the name Restless Chef. Okay, I want to fast forward because for the next couple of weeks, we're going to be talking about your trajectory and how your dad is where he is today. So let's talk about Chen Chen, this restaurant, your first restaurant here in DC. So what was it about opening up here?
It was a huge deal for our group. We were so timid, a little worried about, DC is such a small market, but it's so highly competitive. We don't know. Is there a taste? Is there a spot for something traditional Chinese? And, you know, for the longest time, it was concerned about the overhead, the rental, the rent rates. It was also a huge deal to bring in the staff that wants to come to DC to work.
Well, that's a huge problem.
Yeah.
Sure.
You know, maybe COVID was a blessing in disguise. That fortunately there were some space that was either, the previous tenant did not continue their lease, and the landlord wanted to bring in newer concepts, and they wanted to work with somebody that already knows how to operate in restaurant space and gave us a pretty good rent rate. I think that's when we decided, okay, you know, we were looking for the longest time. I think it was the summer of 2020 we started looking, but it took us over 2 years to find this space.
And what is the difference for people who don't, because you have several different kinds of restaurants. So how does Chen Chen differ from a classic Peter Chang restaurant?
Chen Chen is a new original concept. It's the one and only. There is only one right now in proper DC. When we decide to open in DC, it needs to be something more modern. It needs to be something more fitting to the city crowd. We think about bars. We think about the amazing cocktails. We think about the vibe we want to create. We think about the decors. You know, we do have other restaurants, but they're all in the suburban area that are more family oriented. Over here, we think, you know, nobody's cooking in the city because they don't have a big kitchen, because they don't want to be bothered, because there are so many options. And how do we bring them to Chen Chen either for happy hour, for a special celebration, for a corporate dinner, for anything, any reason you want to come? Yeah.
All right. Well, so let's tell everybody where it is.
We are on 19th Street.
Right.
We are just a little south of DuPont Circle.
Yes. Okay. I'll have the address in the show notes because I see that I have stumped you there. But But I want to thank you again
Thank
for,
you.
first of all, hosting the show.
Yes.
It's a real honor. And I'll look forward to seeing you next week at Ni Hao.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about what's happening there.
I'm very excited.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Lydia. And we're back. That was so great talking with Lydia Chang. It's so exciting to hear the story of her father. And next week, I really hope we can get into more of Lydia's story, because being the daughter of a famous chef isn't easy. And now she's a business partner, and she is really part of the reason that the restaurant group has grown so dramatically in the last couple of years. So we'll get into that next week. And so now, my next guest, I'm very excited, Kathy Jentz. She is editor and publisher of the award-winning Washington Gardener magazine. She's also editor of 3 Plant Society journals, which I don't really know what that means, but I'm going to find out more about that. She also hosts an amazing podcast, Garden DC, which was actually named Best DC Podcast. I need to catch up to her, don't you think, since I've been doing this for so long. She's also an author. She co-authored the book, The Urban Garden, 101 Ways to Grow Food and Beauty in the City. So I want to know all of it, because I am plant adjacent. I love plants, and I love beautiful plants. I'm just not good at it, especially outdoors. So I'm really looking forward to talking to Kathy today. Kathy, thank you so much for joining me.
I am going to have a wonderful time. I already know.
Okay. Well, so let's talk about where your love of plants began. I mean, let's start early on. Was it your grandmother, your mother? Did somebody inspire you?
Yeah, I think both my sets of grandparents were gardeners. My dad's parents were farmers in Northwest Indiana, so we spent summers out there.
Okay.
And then my grandparents in Germany. I was born in Nuremberg, so they had a little allotment garden. And when I say little compared to our community gardens, their allotments are huge.
Oh, okay.
And they have 99-year leases on these allotments. So they can do fruit trees, they had a cistern, they had a collection of gnomes, and that's what my fixation was as a child, was those gnomes.
Oh, I bet.
Rather than the plants themselves.
So
But
now,
yeah.
where did you grow up?
So I was an Army brat, so we moved around a lot, but I ended up mainly here in the DC area. I went to the University of Maryland for journalism, and then settled down here and worked for several associations, as many people in the DC area
I was
do.
like, so did I. I did that too at one point, right?
Yep, so a lot of trade and professional associations. And then at a certain point, I just wanted to work for myself. I wanted my own publication, my own thing. And at that same time, I had been bitten by the gardening bug like crazy.
But what does
Yeah.
that mean?
So-
When you say gardening,
Mhm.
when I hear gardening, I think specific to outside.
Mhm.
I do not think inside.
Mhm.
So is that what you were bitten by initially? Or were
Yeah.
you always I have tons of plants inside kind of person?
I always had some houseplants around, and I love flower arranging and decorating inside.
Okay.
But it was really when I got my own condo. I had a condo in Wheaton that was a walkout patio. And so I started going around to flower markets and stuff and putting containers out there. And then I started gardening outside the patio onto the common grounds. And that's when the HOA was like, no, Kathy.
Aw.
That is not your space. We love your flowers. We love your plants, but that's not yours to garden. So
Okay.
that's when I realized I need my own little place, my own little garden. And at that same time, I was thinking, what can I do to work for myself? And I was just crazy looking for local gardening information. And we have so much going on here in the Mid-Atlantic, but there wasn't a local publication.
When was this? How
That was
long ago?
around 2005-ish.
Okay, so
around
blogs
there. Yeah.
just started.
I was starting a gardening blog. I was writing for my garden club's newsletter and getting a lot of positive feedback on those. And so at that same time, I was looking at organizer or meeting planner type things. And I was like, you know what? I love publications. I want to stick to that.
Okay.
And that's when I started Washington Gardener.
So when you put together Washington Gardener originally, how did you come up with an editorial point of view for it? What was it? How many articles? What were the kinds of things that you wanted in there? What weren't you seeing out there at that time? Because I know when I started the list, I put stuff in there that I could not find anywhere.
Exactly.
So what was it that, from a gardening perspective, you were like, I can't find this info?
Well, one of the things I made our mission was by gardeners for gardeners. So I wanted all of our writers to have that gardening experience.
Okay.
And our number 2 mission that I created was it has to be something that grows in the Washington, D.C. region, in the Mid-Atlantic, what grows here. So that could be a native, it could be exotic, But, what we're seeing on HGTV at that time was the Pacific Northwest, California, Florida, and you weren't seeing the Mid-Atlantic.
Interesting.
And the core of the gardening world is really here in the Tennessee Valley, and that area is where a lot of wholesale growers are, a lot of plants, a lot of hardcore gardeners. And then the other thing I was seeing at garden clubs was obviously aging out of members and losing all that wisdom. So like I would meet somebody who was 95 years old and they would tell me about what they grew, and they knew things that aren't on the internet. They're not in any book. But I was like, I need to capture this information while it's still here with us.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. So smart. So what was it for people who are in the Mid-Atlantic region? Can we talk about what it means to have a garden in the Mid-Atlantic region? Like, my head is going all over the place because I'm thinking like invasive species. Like, I'm thinking of the things you're talking about. Like when I first moved in with my husband and he had a house and we went to a garden center, we didn't know how to have a conversation with a plant person and know what to plant, what should be in a pot. We didn't know anything about invasive species. I mean, I feel like there's been in the last 20 years, a whole change in those kinds of conversations. But when you were starting out, what was the conversation about the Mid-Atlantic, and what was it that you were starting to share as new information to people?
So at that time, perennial gardening was huge. Like that was
for people who don't know the difference. Can you explain?
Sure. So coming off the 80s and 90s, it used to be annuals, which are flowers that you plant every year. Then they would die back in the winter, and you would yank them out and compost them. Whereas perennials flower for a couple weeks and then die back, and then they come back the next year for you. So usually they have 5 or 10 years of a good life, maybe 20 years depending on the perennial. But an annual just means one growing season. And they're usually much more flowering, like flower, nonstop all through the summer. So that might be your like petunias, your impatiens, your marigolds. Those are our annuals. And then perennials would be like black-eyed Susan, coneflower, echinacea, those type of things. All
right. So that's what you were dealing with initially.
Yeah. So a lot of research and new perennials coming out, and then people were moving more into shrub gardening. So replacing their perennials with lower maintenance shrubs. So small blooming hydrangeas, azaleas. So it's a lot less maintenance. You still get the color, you still get the coverage and filling in. So that's the trend that was at that time. And then about, I would say 5 years into the magazine of 2010 or so, I started to notice food gardening was doing this. It was like on that bell curve rise. That the questions I was being asked were how to grow my own food, how to grow it organically for my family.
So 2010, so that makes me think, I think a lot of that had to do with the economy at the time, right? So 2008, you had the crash. And I think people were looking for ways to supplement and looking in their backyard or pots to do that. So was that a major shift for you? Or was it already what you were doing?
So we were doing a little bit of coverage of edibles. So I was like, edibles were kind of to the side.
And edibles meaning like herbs, vegetables,
fruit trees.
Not the gummies.
Yes, not the marijuana edibles.
That's for another day.
Although you could grow that too.
You could do that too. It is a plant.
Yeah, so more on the herbs and the everything edible growing. But yeah, that was always like a side, and I was always like begrudging, like if we did an edible column and the person wanted to do 2 or 3 recipes with it, I was like, really? You want to put recipes in? Because I was like, that's taking up room from other stuff. And now I'm like, recipes, doing my own floral cocktail recipes, sharing them. So it's like so 180 from there. But I think also the other trend besides economizing, people wanting to grow their own and be more green because they can control the inputs, what's going in, make it all organic. But also people were becoming more conscious of food and flavors. So they're like, there are things I can't buy at the farmer's market, at the store, that I want to grow. And that was also converging in the food gardening world, I think, too.
That's fascinating. I think back to like the mid 2000s, the Cathedral
Flower Mart
does that Flower Mart. I remember the first time going. It must have been like 2004 or 2005, 2004 maybe. And I remember finding all these herbs that I'd never heard of.
Mhm.
You know, like there were like 18 kinds of mint, like a
Oh, yeah.
peppermint, not peppermint, but like a pineapple mint,
Mhm.
and then a chocolate mint. I was like, I want all of these things, and like a cinnamon basil, and like all these different
Mm-hmm.
herbs. And that's where I started with herbs. And at the time, plants inside my house, I would have like a plant or two.
Mhm.
I mean, now I have a jungle in my house, and we have changed. But with the shift of people wanting vegetables and the plants, you know, there was this sort of, for the millennials, like started with plants, indoor plants. Like it
Mhm.
started with, what are they called? Succulents.
Yes.
You know, probably like
all the little baby succulents.
right, like
yeah.
2015-ish.
Mhm.
So what do you think was happening? What was it about not just plants outside, but plants inside? What was the generational shift that was happening in the plant world?
I think a lot of the houseplant trend comes from they can't own their own home at that point as far as affording it. So
Mhm.
they're in an apartment, they're looking for green, they bought they have a puppy or a kitten,
Mhm.
they're looking to be a plant parent and expand that. So it's kind of the transition.
Mhm.
But also, houseplants started to become more available from the Florida wholesalers. Were really churning them out, and they were really inexpensive. And then,
Not now.
yeah, not now. Now it's like, what?
I know.
Some of these price tags, I was like, oh, they used to be practically free.
Right.
And I was like, I can give you a cutting of that for free. But yeah, and then the collector craze. So it's kind of like with the tulip mania back, you know, in Holland years
Mhm.
ago, when somebody starts doing it, it becomes a trend, and then the rare ones become ridiculously expensive out of anybody's budget. Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk. So you have Washington Gardner,
Mm-hmm.
and you have all these other sort of media outlets where you're this expert. Can we
Mhm.
talk about what those are and how people can get into them before we start talking about planting season?
Sure. So I have Garden DC. That's
Mhm.
our weekly podcast that comes out every Saturday afternoon.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a long form interview similar to yours. So I'm interviewing an expert on one subject. So it could be all about dogwoods or it could be all about weeding. So
Wow.
one subject each week in depth
Mm-hmm.
on that topic. And then I have a couple short segments on the show. One of them is what's going on this week. So what's blooming in my garden, what tasks you should be doing, local gardening events that might be happening. So I talk
Mhm.
about those. And then I do a plant profile every episode. So
Okay.
any plant, so it's usually something seasonal, so something that's blooming right now, or
Mhm.
maybe it's arugula that you could be planting right now. I'll do a plant profile on that, and
Mm.
it's just, and I'll use that same for our YouTube channel. So
Okay.
the podcast comes over to the YouTube channel, but the plant profile will then have a whole video of the images of the plant and growing it and planting it and what it's like.
That's
on the YouTube
amazing.
channel. Yeah. So I think I'm getting a lot more feedback on those YouTube plant profiles now.
Sure.
I can feel as spring growing season starting, the numbers going up and the comments going up because everybody's like, oh, I've never seen somebody actually show the leaf of this plant. Everybody shows the flower close up.
Right.
But yeah, I show the entire plant and not just the
and
close
sort
up
of walk,
you see on the
walk
tag.
people through it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's talk about planting
Mhm.
outdoors. It's April. Well, by the time this airs, it probably will be May. Are we too late?
Oh no, not at
Can
all.
we talk about, so how do you advise people to not just plant spring, summer, fall, but also how to maintain? Like,
Mhm.
what's the kind of work-life balance with the exterior plants that you need to do in order to have something that's aesthetically pleasing?
Mhm.
And, you know, given your skill level, you know,
Mhm.
let's take a novice.
Yeah. So in our book that I co-wrote with Terry Spate, The Urban
Right.
Garden,
Mhm.
The Food and Beauty in the City, that one we're giving you like 101 small projects to do.
Mhm.
And so those are for ideas and inspiration. So a beginner can come in, leaf through the book and say, I want to do that pot garden. I want to
Okay.
do that herb pot. And they can take that from the book and do that right away
Mhm.
and jump in. And so a lot of the maintenance is what I talk about in my second book, Ground Cover Revolution, where we're talking about taking out a lot of your turf grass lawn, which is your weekly maintenance, usually watering, weeding, fertilizing, mowing,
Mhm.
and replacing that with ground covers with different plant choices for that.
So what is the benefit of that? Is it just from a sustainability standpoint? Is that really what we're talking about?
It's mainly more eco-friendly, but it also lowers your maintenance as the ground covers fill in. So if you had all ground covers, once they're established, they're very low maintenance. Some of them you don't have to touch more than once a year.
And what's an example of a ground cover?
So a ground cover might be, you're seeing right now as we're recording this, the moss phlox.
Okay, that the flowers
that's flowering early,
Uh-huh.
and the rest of the year it just looks like a carpet of dark green moss. And that covers the ground, knocks back the weeds, doesn't need extra watering.
Wow.
Great for holding in a slope. So ground covers can do a lot of different functions in the garden, depending on where you want to put it. But there's so many different ground cover choices. I had to narrow it down to like my top 40 for this book.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I didn't know there were so many.
There's hundreds, but yeah, I had to narrow it down to that. And so classic ones that are considered invasive would be like English ivy, the Asian pachysandra, and Vinca minor. Those are ones that are kind of like crazy invasive ground covers.
Okay, so since you brought up invasive, can we talk about how a plant, is it that somebody plants something that should either be put in a pot, I'm guessing, but they wind up putting it in the ground? Like, is bamboo invasive?
Yes, so bamboo is one of our worst invasive. It's the running bamboo. So there's clumping bamboo varieties that are fine.
Okay.
They'll just stay in a clump and slowly expand. But the running bamboo varieties will go out past your property into neighboring parks and wildlife areas, and then that's when it creates a problem. So if you can keep it pinned in and neat, it's probably not an issue.
Okay.
But it's always, I always say it's the second or third owner of the house who doesn't know that they inherited this bamboo grove.
But what is wrong with its growth? Like, what is it? Because I think people don't really understand when you say it's an invasive species, what the negativity of it is.
So it can be displacing some of our native species. It can be so rampantly growing that that's all there is in that thicket. So like English ivy also will grow up a tree, and once it matures, it can take down the tree canopy. It can start pulling down limbs.
Oh, so it could really hurt the tree.
Yeah. So English ivy is one of the top ones because of that. Most of the others, it's usually because it's displacing the native spring ephemerals, or it has no real wildlife value. So it's not providing food or nectar for wildlife.
That makes a lot of sense. Well, since you brought that up, so there's a lot of what we plant for the season, we want pollinated. Bees are so important. And there's sort of a lot of mixed signals right now about bees that like all of a sudden we have a lot of them, whereas like a couple years ago they're like, we don't have enough. Yeah. So where are we with all that right now?
So about, I would say 8 years ago was that honeybee decline. We were losing. So now the honeybees seem to be re-emerging.
Well, a lot of people, I mean, I have to tell you, in my neighborhood, I mean, I live in Kensington. So, I mean, it's a very sort of crunchy area. There are easily like, I have multiple neighbors who are doing bees. Yes. And like their bees are in my yard, and I'm always, it's so nice. Like, I love it. Yeah,
so many people took up the hobby of beekeeping. It's great. But so the problem with that for the native purists is that's a European honeybee. That was brought in specifically to pollinate apple tree groves, and those sorts of things. So they're great for agriculture, great for our gardens, but they want to promote the native bees. And most of the native bees don't make honey. They're solitary bees. They just might, nest in a little hole in the ground or like a tube on a flower. They'll be nesting in there. So you might not even notice them. You might think it's a little tiny fly or a little tiny native bee that's buzzing around. So those are the ones now that people are trying to emphasize to
as a
assist
priority.
Those. Yeah.
Interesting. That's very interesting. Okay, so what are we planting right now?
So right now in the edible garden in my plot, I have radishes, carrots, arugula, my salad greens. I just put in little spring onions. And I didn't realize when I bought a bag of spring onions that there was 200 for $250. It was like, I was like, $2.50. And I was like, I think I have more onions than I can fit in my plot. So yeah, onions cheap and easy. And I just started.
Can I just tell you, when we were in Barcelona, so there was a grill at one of the farmers markets that we were at, and they had these massive spring onions. They looked like a spring onion and a leek combined, and they were just on the grill. and you just sort of got them and peeled off the papery ends and bit into it. It was delicious. Wow. So there you go. There's what you can do with your spring onions.
That's intense. But yeah, and I just potted up. I'd like to do a different potato every year.
Okay.
So I did some blue varieties last year. So this year I bought a dark red Norland potato, which has a dark red skin but white flesh inside.
Ooh.
So I just potted up a potato grow bag to experiment with that. Because usually I grow my potatoes in the ground in hills.
Do you use a potato to grow a potato?
Mm-hmm.
That's what I thought.
So
but how does it create more potatoes?
So you get what's called a seed potatoes. You can get those from a local garden center or mail order seed potatoes.
Okay.
You can also create your own.
Okay.
So if you went to your normal local grocery store and bought a potato,
mm-hmm.
most of them are sprayed with a growth inhibitor on
them.
Nothing will happen. So they won't sprout.
Right.
But if you get an organically grown or from your local farmer's market,
mm-hmm.
then you can let that sprout, and then you just need one section, like one eye, like one sprout. So people call it chitting, CHITTING, to cut it up into sections into those grow nodes. And then you plant those.
So like where the eyes are, that's
correct.
Where it sprouts.
Yeah.
Okay.
So each section needs one of those, or it's not going to do anything.
I got you. That's what I learned when, when with my Monstera,
mm-hmm.
I didn't, with the roots.
Yep.
I didn't realize, like the very first time I cut one, that's what I needed
mm-hmm.
in order to propagate, because I didn't know what I was
mm-hmm.
doing. Now I know. Same thing with the what's it called? Not Pachysandra. What's the indoor plant?
Pothos? Because that one, that one makes so many.
Is it pothos or pathos?
I say pothos, but
you're
some people
right.
say pothos, and it's POTHOS, however you want to pronounce it.
I have a lot of that in my house, and I propagate the shit out of that.
Very easy to propagate in water.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love an easy plant.
I was just going to say on potatoes that the great thing about potatoes is once you have those little starts, then you mound soil over them.
Okay.
And then the plant grows up. You mound more soil. As it grows up. And everywhere, just like with your Monstera, the soil is along the stem.
Okay.
It creates more roots and more potatoes.
Oh, so every time roots come out, you add more dirt.
Correct.
Because potatoes grow underground.
Yes.
Oh,
so it's the tubers at the end of the root. So it'll
mm-hmm.
send out a root, and there's tuber, and that's what you're eating are those starchy tubers.
So how long? So if we're planting that now,
mm-hmm.
when do our labors come to fruition?
So you can probably start digging out and getting potatoes probably August, September.
Okay.
But you can leave them in the ground and keep going. Like you can keep mounding like once a month.
But will they make it through the winter? No.
Yeah.
They will.
So shockingly, we have pretty mild winters. So what did our ancestors do before refrigeration? It was ground storage.
Okay.
So they were either digging them up or putting them in a cellar.
Right.
But some of them just left the potatoes in the ground and you just dug them as you ate them. So as long as you had like straw on top or some insulation.
To keep the ground from freezing.
Exactly. They were fine. So I did that last winter. I left a few in. And then I will also say, every gardener has done this. You don't get all your potatoes when you dig. Like you think you got all your potatoes, right?
But there's more down there.
And there's like one little one and it sprouts up and you're like, well, that wintered over fine. Like I could have just left that in there, right?
That's amazing. Okay, let's talk about herbs
mm-hmm.
a little bit. Because my I have a huge rosemary. She stayed.
Yep.
She got a little crusty, like dried out throughout the winter. But I think she's gonna be fine.
Mm-hmm.
It's a hardy plant.
Did it flower for you? Like those little blue flowers over the winter?
I don't think so.
Yeah. So usually they're flowering in late winter, early spring.
Okay.
Covered in those little blue flowers. And that's a good indication that it's still fine.
The only thing that's flowering right now is my chives, my garlic chives.
Mm-hmm.
I love those flowers. They're so pretty.
They're so pretty.
So what are we planting for herbs? What do you love? Like what's out there right now that you're like, this is in my garden and I love
mm-hmm.
it because it's either pretty or I use a lot of it. What do you think?
So I just planted parsley.
Okay.
And that's actually more almost for pollinators than for me.
Okay.
Because they love that. I did a row of dill. And that's the dill bouquet is the
mm-hmm.
variety because, again, it's for the flower and the pollinators. I might snip a little bit off and use it like
mm-hmm.
in a cocktail or cooking, but mainly it's for the pollinators. But the one that I'm growing for myself to eat is cilantro. And that's definitely a cool season herb. So spring and fall. It hates our summers,
mm-hmm.
which I always think is funny because, cilantro is associated with hot season climates
yes.
like Mexico and Thai food.
Right.
But I basically have to keep a cover cloth on it to stop it from bolting, going to flower and seed the second it gets like 90 degrees.
Okay, so let's talk about herbs and flowering and how, like with basil, like all these herbs, what is the best way to care for them throughout the summer?
So you can just keep on grooming them, like snipping off sections to use in cooking. And you want to kind of like pinch out the tops. If you start to see a flower stem start to form, you're just going to pinch out that flower stem. Those are edible too. And they certainly can be a garnish or anything else. But what you're trying to do is make it grow bushier rather than taller.
Grow up.
So you wanted to pinch it back, pinch it back, pinch it back. Every time you start to see it get a little leggy or flowers forming. And then you get a lot more thick leafy growth, which is what we're harvesting, are the leaves for most herbs.
Right.
Then usually around, I would say, beginning of August or so, I let my basil go to flower and seed.
Okay. I don't know what the seed part is. Like I let my flower too because I know it's not coming in the house.
It'll flower, and then the pollinators are all over it. The bees, especially the honeybees, love those basil flowers.
Okay.
And again, makes a good garnish. It's pretty.
Yes.
You can put it in an arrangement if you wanted to. And then once it dries, it forms the seed heads, and the seeds will just spill out onto the ground and it'll reseed itself, or you can collect those seeds for planting next year.
Next year.
Yep.
Oh, okay. I don't know if I'm that advanced, but I like where your head's at.
That one's one of the super same thing, like similar to marigolds. So you would let your marigolds flower at the end of fall instead of snipping them or using them as a flower, and then the seed heads form, and you just collect those dried seed heads in an envelope.
But you have to wait. But you have to wait until the following year, right?
Yeah. So you wouldn't plant them out till like next April, May.
Okay. So now I have a question, just because somebody gave me like a pot of tulips, like in mid-March.
Yep.
So they're dead, but now I have these bulbs. But I can't plant them now, right? What do I do with the bulbs?
Yes. You could store them dry in a paper bag and then plant them this fall.
Okay.
So just brush off the soil and stuff. Or you could plant them out in the soil if you wanted to. But I would say usually what happens if I have a bunch of container grown bulbs like that, daffodils and tulips, I'll do that. I'll just let them dry, pull them out, lay them in a crate, and then put them in a paper bag and just label it, do it October.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's
Label
very
it
helpful.
is important, I'm going to say, because
you're
not going to remember.
Yes.
You're not.
I know. Set a phone reminder,
yes,
right?
Exactly.
Okay. So we only have a couple more minutes. I want to move inside. So, like I said, in my earlier days, I would have plants in the house. I didn't understand what to do or how to do. I wasn't paying attention to the light that was necessary. And now I have every room has plants in it. We bring a lot of the outdoor plants in, a lot of, majesty palms and imperial palms and monsteras, the pothos.
Yep.
I keep saying pathos. Pothos. And I have a couple birds of paradise and things like that. But let's talk about the sort of excitement about indoor plants and how to really best care for them seasonally. So like spring and summer, because how you care for them in the winter is totally different than the summer.
Yeah. So just like your outdoor plants, and I always say house plants are outdoor plants in other places. They're not all. So south of here, those are some Florida outdoor plants, or some tropicals in South America or Central America. So they have the same life cycle, meaning that spring and summer is when they're putting on their growth, when they're usually blooming. So they need extra fertilizer. So usually by beginning of March or so, you're going to start fertilizing. Whereas in the winter, you want to stop fertilizing and let them kind of go into dormancy and let them relax.
Okay.
And of course, with orchids, total exception.
Sure.
Every orchid's like the exception for almost everything. And then some of the plants that are coming from below the equator, like South Africa, they're also going to be the opposite because their winters are opposite. So like amaryllis, which we're treating as a Christmas plant, that's like, a South African or South American type plant.
That's so fascinating.
So it's like, oh, why are you pushing all your growth now? So same thing, African violets, they'll flower more in the wintertime usually.
Right.
But I would say for most people, I am a total overwaterer, so I have to restrain myself. So same thing, just checking the plant pot picking it up for the weight and knowing how heavy it is important when it's full of water. Or if it's light, that means you water it.
Okay, that's very good advice. Let's talk about with the plants though. You said fertilizing. Not everybody knows what that means. And how about let's talk about the care, like fertilizing the plant, indoor and outdoor, really. And then also I'm so afraid to trim a plant or cut it. I have a fabulous fiddlehead. Is that what's it called? One of the big
fern.
tall ones. No, not fern. What's one of those tall?
Oh, like a ficus? No.
I don't know.
It'll come to you.
It'll come to me. I thought it was a fiddlehead, but not a fiddlehead fern. I did cook those last week though. But I clearly did not know how to cut it. So now it's not growing tall anymore. Now it's growing this way. And I was like, oh, I wanted to go up, but I didn't know what I was doing. So can we talk about fertilizing, what that means, when's the best time to do it, and with what, indoor and outdoor, and then, because I think a lot of people over-fertilize as well, because they're like, I want it to be healthy, because we're all vitamin freaks. And then about trimming and pruning correctly.
Yeah. So I would say with fertilizing for your house plants, again, spring, summer, when they're in their growth phase, same thing with outdoor. Most of the things you're growing in your outdoor spaces don't need extra fertilizer.
Okay.
So unless it's a fruit-bearing plant, tomatoes, peppers, fruit trees, those need some extra vitamins and boost to form the fruits.
Okay.
But otherwise, everything else is usually in the soil. As long as you have good soil, it's going to pull it from that. Houseplants, you only have this tiny universe of soil, and that can get depleted of nutrients really quickly. So, and another big thing on fertilizer is, despite what the ads say, it's your vitamins and your supplements. They make their own food from the sun. They're making chlorophyll. That's the food, but you're just giving it a little more minerals and nutrients and vitamins to help it make the food.
That makes sense. Because it needs no different than grapes, right? It needs a terroir in order to be healthy.
So for houseplants, the easiest thing I always tell people is just do a very weak solution of liquid fertilizer when you're watering once a week or so.
So what do you use?
So I just use any liquid fertilizer formulated for houseplants.
Okay.
And just do the very weak solution, like a quarter of a cap, or it might just say a whole cap for a gallon, and do it every time, because otherwise it'll usually say a whole cap every 2 to 3 waterings or every 2 to 3 weeks. Are you going to remember 2, 3? Did I did it last time? Do I do it this time? So that's why I say just do a very weak solution every time during that period, the spring, summer period. And then after that, stop that. Don't do any more fertilizing for the fall, winter.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I told you I heard about banana peels and cucumber peels.
Yeah.
So I make a little slurry of those, sometimes together, sometimes separate. Is that enough for fertilizing, or should I really be using something?
Yeah, you should be using, because that's not going to have all the minerals and vitamins that are needed, so that are formulated for those. So that might give them a little bit of potassium with the banana peel, but it really doesn't really have that much that they're going to absorb. I would use banana peel more for planting with my rose bushes or outside, or just compost it and add it to my compost, and then do a top dressing with the compost on your house plants, and then that nutrients are going to be absorbed and come in.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate that advice. Okay, so tell us where we can find all the things with you, where we can see you on all the socials, where we can find you on YouTube, where we can buy your books, and where we can get in touch with you and get your magazine as well.
Great. So with the books, wherever books are sold, so Amazon, I like to say bookshop, because that promotes your local independent bookstores. Sure. So all the best boys and poets in the city are carrying Ground Cover Revolution and the Urban Garden. Great. And if they're out, ask them to order more, because they will. And so for me on social media, I'm at WDC Gardener on most everything. So Twitter, Instagram, all of the socials, Pinterest. And YouTube, it's Washington Gardener Magazine, all one word for the channel.
Great. And
same thing on Facebook. The Washington Gardener Magazine is the magazine's page. And then under my name, Kathy Jentz, you can find my personal stuff there.
Great.
I don't mind people following me on Facebook. That's fine too.
Okay, great. Yep. Well, you have been an absolute wealth of knowledge, because I think a lot of people are very intimidated when it comes to, they're the experts.
Yep.
I feel like it's like wine. Do you know what I mean? Planting and our outdoor spaces are so important to keeping our
Absolutely.
mental health in place,
Yeah.
and we want them to all be aesthetically pleasing. So learning the basics is very important.
Mhm.
So I greatly appreciate you joining me today, and I greatly appreciate you all for checking in today for what's happening on Industry Night. Here we are at Chen Chen, and it's been a glorious first show here. Stay tuned because next week we'll be at the brand new Ni Hao, which I cannot wait to see. Of course, you want to follow me at NYCCINELLIS on all the platforms because I am eating out, I'm traveling, I'm having so much fun, and you should be there with me because there's so much good happening in and around the DC area. Trying to think if there's anything else. I don't think that's it. Don't forget to tune in to Foodie and the Beast every Sunday at 11 a.m. on 1500 a.m. And don't forget, you can watch the show if you're listening on YouTube. And if you have any questions for me or Kathy, please get to us anywhere at Nycci Nellis, on YouTube, on Kathy's site, all the things. We will get back to you. So thanks for joining me today and have a delicious week.
Produced by Heartcast Media.